All right, we're live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for Becoming a True Human. My name is Chris Smith. I'm instructor for the Academy for Mindfulness. I am author of a book called Being a Good Story. Part of my training is marriage and family counseling. I teach mindfulness meditation. Dave,
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Um, my name's Dave Kopacz. I'm a psychiatrist and boarded in integrative medicine, holistic medicine as well. I'm author of several books, including most recently Caring for Self and Others, Transforming Burnout, Compassion Fatigue, and Soul Loss. And today, Chris, for our podcast, I would like to focus on the topic of let's do something positive.
did you say let's do something positive?
Yeah, let's do something positive. Do you got anything?
Still thinking right now.
Still thinking. I don't know. Maybe this is going to be a short podcast, huh?
Maybe we're done, Dave.
Maybe we're done. I know. God, it's been a tough time. I haven't been sleeping well this whole week. I could only sleep about 4 hours. I'd wake up and I'd be up for a couple hours. And then I got sick. I've got a cold right now. And I don't know. We both have had health problems we've been dealing with on top of everything else. So, yeah. Um, But I started thinking about this. Let's do something positive. This week, I just joined, I didn't tell you this yet. I just joined as an ambassador, the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation. So Lorna Breen was a physician who died by suicide during the early days of the pandemic. And then this foundation has grown up around her memory to try to prevent physician suicide and to help support healthcare worker well-being. And so I was on this call this week, the first time I participated. There's maybe about 70 people or so on this call. And some of the stories, I mean, people are just telling stories about how suicide had affected them, like losing spouses, children, um, colleagues, all who were in healthcare who died by suicide. And I was like, there's just so much pain, raw pain in this group right now. But I start to become aware too of this tremendous passion, this tremendous power that everybody had. And that in sharing the stories and creating this group where everyone was there to support each other, there was something very positive coming out of this pain. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that idea of transforming the pain into positivity?
Yeah, I mean, that strikes, as you know, close to home. I certainly have experienced that in my own family, where one of my parents died by suicide. I've also written about it. And I too, I too have found that to be true for me, in that what are things that I might have learned, or what are things can I learn? And maybe, Dave, the other thing that for me, really, if I'm honest, has been a motivator for me my entire life, which is what are ways that I might be of service to others? Here's something that's really, to me, and I'm sure many listeners and maybe you connect with. So that happened in my own family, and it instilled in me this desire to help others that might be experiencing some of these thing issues. And irony of ironies, after I completed my undergraduate and then completed my graduate and then postmasters, lo and behold, the first place that I served in my capacity as a mental health provider was in a small rural community, almost identical to the type of community that I grew up in. And part of my own um, mission and job description was to offer mental health services to persons, families who could not afford counseling. And so I had this unbelievable opportunity to really to kind of bring some of those experiences and to bring some of that training to the very communities that I grew out of, which was very satisfying. But I don't think the story that I'm telling about that is unique. I think I hear that, like what you're saying with the organization that you're a part of, very much a part. And I feel there are many people that do the same thing, that out of their own tragedy, find ways to really give back to their communities based on some of that initial suffering.
Yeah. In a way, I mean, it's almost like the universal human dilemma is pain and suffering is going to happen in your life. And how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to make sense of it? How are you going to continue to live when things are really bleak? And I think, people might be feeling that right now in these current times, how can we keep going on when there feels like there's so much that's pulling us down?
There, can I just offer a poem?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Um, so this is from 16th century from an Indian poet named Mirabai, and it's one of my favorites. It's one that I've used a lot in some of the mindfulness teaching and that I and you do as well. But it's called a hundred objects close by, and it goes like this: I know a cure for sadness. And sometimes when I think about that, think about it could be I know a cure for fatigue. I know a cure for whatever you are noticing, lack of sleep. And Mirabai says this, I know a cure for sadness. Let your hands touch something that make your eyes smile. Let your hands touch something that make your eyes smile. And then she says, I bet, I bet there are 100 objects close by that can do that. I bet there are 100 objects close by that can do that. And then she says, look at beauty's gifts to us. Her power is so great. She enlivens the earth, the sky, our soul. One of the things that I like, and if you don't mind, I've been reading lately some of Dr. Ellen Longer's work. She is a professor
But
at,
just can we pause for a minute with the poem, though? Let's let it create a little space for the poem
yeah,
before you go to the next thing. Read the last uh, couple lines again.
look at beauty's gift to us. Her power is so great. She enlivens the earth, the sky, our soul.
Yeah, I love that poem. It's that cure for sadness. I know the cure for sadness. It starts out with there's that universal, kind of truth that we're dealing with. And then it gives this offering is that you've got all these things right by you. We surround ourselves with things in our lives, and yet we don't look at them. We don't hold something up and say, wow, that's a beautiful thing I put on my desk. I can pick that up.
And the word cure that's used in this
Mhm.
translation, at least, I mean, if you look at the etymology, it's not like cures, like it's all sewn up, it's all better, but it really speaks to this idea of restoring, restore to health, restore to a sound state. So it really kind of leans into this restoration of health. And the other thing that I like about this is that when she says, I bet there are 100 objects nearby, well, 100, what the poet, from a poetic perspective, is saying is 100 is not just 100. It really is an infinite amount, that there are infinite possibilities around us. And this is where I wanted to tie in Ellen
Mhm.
Long.
Yeah.
Ellen Longer has a great definition of mindfulness that isn't used as much as, say, the one that we might be familiar with, which is, paying attention in the present moment, um, and unconditionally. Her definition is really to look closely and to see what maybe you haven't seen before. It's like looking at something like if we had a paper cup or if we
Mhm.
just had a cup and we are looking at this cup, and the instruction that she might give is, can you see three things there that you might not have noticed before? And so there's this invitation to really to see, and maybe to see in ways that you have not seen before. And I like that, because often we see things and maybe our minds make up what it is, but her invitation is continue to see. So it's like when we look at our suffering or when we look at anything, can we begin noticing? It's like illness.
Mhm.
One of the things that was helpful for me in her work in my particular illness is it would be really easy for me to look at my illness only in a very negative light. And it certainly is, continues to be, was very difficult. But the thing that was helpful for me with what she's offering is to also notice there are moments when the illness is not full on 100%. It could be 80%. She really helps me to see more variability with what I have come to understand as illness and disease. And so that idea of seeing, and looking, to me has been very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that idea, the pain and the cure of pain, they're both present at the same time. Sadness and the cure for sadness are both present at the same time. There's the ancient Greek word for medicine is pharmakon, and the ancient Greek word for poison is pharmakon. It's the same word. It all depends on how you use the pharmakon. It can either kill you or cure you. And I think that perspective of that whatever is happening around you, you can look closely and see something there that maybe isn't the first thing that you see. And when you're talking about a cup, I was thinking about Joseph Rael in our last book we did together, A Bowl Full of Ideas for Inventive Minds, and how Joseph will do things like you sit and look at this cup, and he's like, listen, sounds like cup, doesn't it? Cup, cup, cup. Let's see if we found it somewhere. Cup, cup, cup. And then you think about what is the energy and the essence, what is the cupping of the cup? And the cup it's holding something nourishing, something good. So the cup is not just something that an item of utility. The cup is something that is actually holding a space for us to fill with nourishment, to fill with goodness. And so the cup is also like a metaphor. And then we can think of, well, there's the cup of our heart or the cup of our soul. And maybe it's damaged or injured, or, maybe it's filled with gunk or something. But the nature of the cup is that we can fill it back up with something nourishing, and we can use it to support ourselves in the life that we're living.
In the other thing that you remind me of is in this poem, Mirabai talks about, I know for a cure for sadness, and maybe we could put illness or disease. And I think one of the things that's helpful about this poem, and again, what I'm sort of sharing with Ellen Longer, is that it is possible, I think. I think everyone has a capacity in the midst of illness or difficulty or whatever we might call it, to have access to what Mirabai calls beauty. So, like one example I think I've shared before with you, and maybe on this podcast, is at a particular point when I was on a retreat, really feeling a silent retreat, really feeling a great deal of pain, physical and mental pain. I was tired, wasn't sleeping well. And during a particular walking meditation, I heard the sound of a cardinal. And it occurred to me that I can be in a fair amount of pain and still have this capacity to take in the sound of the song of a cardinal, which to me was beauty. Again, it's an idea that it's available. There's 100 objects close by that are available. Now, did it make the pain go away? No.
Hmm.
Um, and did I have that expectation? Well, maybe some, but it didn't.
Yeah.
And yet something shifts. Uh, Pain or difficulty or challenge or disease is not monolithic. But somehow I feel and think that we have this capacity to also take in beauty, and that that's
Yeah.
available to us. When I was in the middle, most recently with the latest disease, there were moments of great pain where there would be literally tears coming down my eyes because of some of this. And one of the things that I began experimenting with, based on this experience I told you, was I began to visualize pictures that I happen to have on my phone of the grandkids. And now, did it end the pain? No. Did it make it? Sometimes I couldn't even do it because the pain was too much and that just wasn't available. And as I continued, I decided to kind of take this as a practice. Is it possible, in addition to pain, to also take in kind of what warmed my heart when I would see these pictures? And I found that that was something that I could do. And in some ways that I still can't fit words around, it was comforting. It it like widened the field or made a bigger space. The pain was still there, but what was also there was warm feelings that I have and continue to have with interacting with our grandkids.
Yeah. It's like, when we have the tip of our heart and we've got the pain in it, and it's hurting, it's hurting, it's hurting, we tend to contract. But the pain also sort of breaks or makes the cup permeable so the beauty can come in more easily. Like hearing that cardinal, you've probably heard a cardinal thousands of times in your life, but for some reason at that point in that pain, the beauty of the cardinal's call came in. And so, maybe part of the cure for pain too is not getting rid of the pain, but creating a larger cup. And I think about meditation that way too, that the goal of meditation is not to get rid of things, but to create a larger space within ourselves so that the percentage of pain decreases. You've still got the same pain, but instead of it being 98% of your consciousness, you enlarge your consciousness, and that pain is now only 80% or 60%.
And that's one of the things I feel like I've learned about illness and disease at my age is I didn't have this idea that it could be worked with. I thought once
Mhm.
it was there and it was in charge. And what I learned is that there was some play, there was some potential of play. The irony, of course, is that I learned about this via the illness itself.
Mhm. Yeah. When I got diagnosed with cancer, I talked to my friend Joseph Rael, who'd also had melanoma, and he said, "Do you know why you got this cancer?" And I, thought and fumbled and tried to come up with some different reasons why. And then he said, "It's because you're still in training." And so then that approach, I know Susan Sontag has, written about not using cancer as a metaphor and not blaming the victim for having cancer. But this idea of it being training meant I was like, I don't know what I'm in training for. And I don't know what the lesson is, but it made me approach things at times where I was like, I don't know why I'm going through this. And if I looked at it as I'm a passive victim of this, it feels miserable. If I look at it as there's something in this that I can learn and grow from, because in life, every single experience, there's something you can learn and grow from. So I'm still in training. I don't know what I'm going to be when I'm done with this training. I don't know if the training's ever going to end. I don't know. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I have no idea. But you remind me of this phrase that I heard happened to be a Buddhist teacher called "Don't waste your suffering."
Yeah.
And it reminds me of a variation of what you're saying about training. I did look up that phrase and discovered it came from one of the popes,
Oh,
which surprised me.
mhm.
But this idea that find ways of working with suffering is a possibility for all of us. And and I want to add another point to that.
Mhm.
And I've learned this from you, I've learned it from others, is that sure, this is sort of something one does themselves, and it's something that's done in community.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that is sometimes another thing I learned is for me, illness and disease for me had the effect at times of isolating me for many, many reasons. And one of the things I found is strength through through community, and just talking about it, sharing about it. I mean, you and I spent at least an hour before these recordings talking about some of
Right.
these things, which
And that was
is
that community, with the Dr. Lauren Breen Heroes Foundation. And I think, we experienced that with the VA whole health community. And so that's part of this idea of let's do something positive. Let's move from a state of shock and fear and negativity into doing something. It's not going to make the pain go away necessarily, but it will make us better heart people, to use one of Joseph Rael's phrases. So, this week, Jonathan McFarland, the president of Doctors, a Humanist, and I were going back and forth about a bunch of different things. And I kept saying to him, we should create a starter pack on Blue Sky that will be a place where we can put like all the doctors humanist people, and with one click you can follow all these people who are arranged around a particular topic. And Jonathan put something out like restoring the heart and soul of medicine is what he called this starter pack. And then we put that out there, and I said, let's do something positive. And people started saying, hey, I want to be part of this too. Can I be part of this? How can I join into this? So there's this tremendous craving right now for people. It's almost like a polarity shift of like, okay, I'm immersed in negativity. How can we shift that polarity to take this pain and turn it into some passion that's going to drive us forward towards some meaning and some purpose? Or, how do we move from um, being in pain to being in training?
and one way, one path is community, finding one's community. We talked a little before we started recording on my side of it, again, working with inflammatory bowel disease. And there happens to be a few family members that have variations of this. And so we have a thread that we call the tough tummies. And on this thread, we're kind of free to vent. We share recipes, we share research, we share pieces of writing, but it really is, again, a way of creating these communities of support that I think are enlivening, getting back to
Yeah.
Mirabai.
Yeah, pockets of positivity.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, you talked about that, the pockets before. Do you want to go into, we should record, what we should do is we should record the stuff that we're talking about before we record, and then we can release it as two different podcasts. There's like the making of the podcast. It'll be like the director's cut type of thing where we're actually talking about it. And then later in the podcast, we'll say like, well, before we started recording, we were saying this. But before we started recording, you were talking about St. Francis.
Yeah, I mean, this is a little pivot, but one of the things that I was really interested in, just because of the state of how things are right now, um, and how that is at least created, at least some of the persons that I work with, is created, some disturbance of some sorts. I mean, like for instance, I could say some of the work that I have been doing has ended because of some of the decisions that have been made. I mean, some of the really big chunks of my livelihood have yeah, ended. And so, one of the things that I begin thinking about with some of the things that I care about, what are ways that I might be able to continue doing them? I already confessed that I did apply to Costco. I mean, that's my backup plan. But my hope, if I'm really honest, is to be able to continue some of the very things that matter to me, that for me are of value. And one of them has been what are ways that we can really include structural social drivers of health as a way of addressing the whole person. And so many of these programs and courses and um, have come to an end. And so one of the things that began to intrigue me is how do I work with that in a respectful way? And so for whatever reason, I've been reading from St. Francis of Assisi. And one of the things that was very interesting to me with St. Francis is that, here he was in Italy. There was a lot going on with the empire. There was this huge organization called the Holy Roman Church that had all kinds of mandates. And one of the things that Francis did in part of his work is that he did not decide to go against the empire, that he'd be crushed. And although you may feel that way, but it probably is not going to be helpful. And ultimately, it probably is not going to be helpful for the things that you care about and for the things that you care about that will extend in the future. He found this amazing way to be able to work with the church and the empire and also do those things that he cared about, such as working with the poor, um, poverty, um, in terms of some of his writings. And part of what he did also is to create these communities that, and again, were very much in line with what are ways that we might serve others. And so he walked this really very, very delicate rope, if you will, between, again, honoring the empire and the church of the day, and to be able to really define those things and express those things that he cared about. And he was very successful at that. So that's one of the things that I think about. And I think with some of the work that I care about is I also think about what are ways that this work might extend in the future? Maybe today, the things that I really would like to teach or to do probably can't give the fullest version of it. And yet, maybe finding other versions of it still allows it to go forward. It
Yeah.
may not go out in the way, the full stream that I have in my mind, but maybe enough of a flow can go out in a way that will allow it to continue until someone else, again, sort of takes it and develops it.
Jerry Arbuckle's a Catholic priest and a cultural anthropologist, so he's got a lot of interesting books looking at both kind of social movements as well as individuals and faith communities. He's worked also in healthcare communities and wrote a book on rehumanizing healthcare, which I read that was kind of influential when I was writing Rehumanizing Medicine. But anyway, Jerry talks about the concept of refounding and the refounding person. He talks about St. Francis of Assisi as a refounding person. And the idea of refounding is a visionary person creates an institution, or an institution rises around a visionary person. At some point, that institution loses the vision and becomes focused on maintaining the institution rather than the vision. And so periodically, a refounding person is required to say, hey, we've lost our way. We've lost care for the poor. We've lost, these different important um, things to focus on. And so the refounding person goes through their own kind of dark night of the soul and then comes up with a way to help move forward for themselves and to move the institution forward as well. And so this idea of refounding, it's kind of like a initiation for an organization as well as an initiation for an individual. Um, so there's somewhere else I was going to go with that, but what do you any thoughts or springboards from that refounding?
Yeah, this happened again when the Franciscan tradition, Bonaventure, again another wonderful Italian person, and ended up teaching in Paris for I don't know a while, but really a foundational person in terms of the Franciscan tradition. Was one of those persons.
Yeah.
And he, wrote things again to sort of revitalize this Franciscan tradition. And if you would look at it today, you would think, oh, that person kind of missed some key points. Why did they focus on this and that? And I think one of the things that we might say is that we're looking back from our particular time, but if we happen to be where he was and what he was doing, and again, working within the confines and strengths of academia, and again, with a large church and its hierarchy, what he did was, again, helpful enough to allow this tradition to continue. Maybe in not the way that we, in its fullness, or maybe not in the way that fully reflects, if you will, St. Francis, but it still allowed this to continue.
Yeah. Here's what I wanted to say too, to kind of move it beyond, sort of the uh, St. Francis and Bonaventure, to look at all of us have this challenge right now of how do we remain caring in uncaring times? How do we continue to promote the human? What's the name of our podcast? Something like Becoming a True Human. Yeah. So how do we become a true human? How do we maintain our humanity when our humanity is under assault? And when the times are actually pushing towards inhumanity or dehumanization instead of caring. I've been thinking about this, Chris, a lot of like, we both talk a lot about caring and compassion. It's part of the mindfulness tradition. It's, the last book that I wrote. It's what we do as healthcare professionals. And so caring is this thing that we're trying to do, and all of a sudden it feels like we can't do it, or it feels like we used to care for others around the world, and now our country is pulling back. We used to care for everybody within the country, but now there's this us them that's going on, and the circle of caring is becoming smaller and smaller until it becomes, the individual ego just saying, me first, this is mine, I want more. And so what's the opposite of caring? We have this uncaring. And the uncaring, there's a whole spectrum of uncaring sounds kind of neutral, but there could be a lot of other icky, yucky things happening within the realm of uncaring. But if we just hold these two together and say, is what I'm doing coming from a place of caring, or is it coming from a place of uncaring? That really simplifies life a lot, doesn't it? That's really all you've got to do is to think, am I leading my life from a place of caring, or am I leading my life from a place of uncaring? And the challenge, or the I don't know what we'd call it, the danger is that in our caring mission of what we've been doing as healthcare workers and humans in the world of, working towards shared humanity, fear can shift us from caring into uncaring. And then we might not be doing the bad things that are at the far spectrum of uncaring, but we've lost caring and we've moved over into uncaring. And then that makes everything just a little bit worse, a little bit less rewarding, less gratifying. Everything becomes harder. When you're an uncaring, everything becomes harder.
So what's the positive?
What's the positive? I don't know. I was hoping I'd come up with the question and you'd come up with the answer this podcast. So, what's the positive? So, here are some thoughts I had. How do we create these pockets of positivity? How do we
Okay.
create a community? You and I are creating a community right now. We're sharing it. It's the two of us, and Corbin's sleeping there, taking care of business. But we're going to share this with people. Maybe one person will see this and hear it and think about how they can be more caring in their world or how they can create some sort of um, uh, culture of compassion. That's kind of another way of saying how can we focus on caring? How can we create cultures of compassion versus cultures of the opposite of compassion, whatever that is? And so what I started thinking too, what I put out on Blue Sky was let's all start this positive conversation about people who want to do something positive, who are kind of tired of all the doom scrolling and everything. And what can we do? Read a book and put a quote out there from the book, or um, write something. And there's lots of different ways with journaling that we can do of the Pennebaker protocol, which is write about something traumatic or negative in your life, 15 minutes, like 4 times a week, something like that. Um, there's the gratitude practices, which is write something that you're grateful for, something that's positive. That's like Mirabai noticing one of the 100 objects around. Write about that. Write about just there's the Julia Cameron model of the artist pages. Write 3 pages stream of consciousness, whatever comes into your mind, or write a blog for Closler. There's this great organization called Closler that I've been publishing a lot of things. I just published something, um, Zen and the Art of Physician Maintenance. That was their
I
idea for the title.
love it.
Yeah, yeah. Zen and the Art of Physician Maintenance. And then the other one, then I started thinking when they changed the title slightly to that, I was like, oh, this gives me an idea. The Tao of Medicine. So then I wrote a essay or blog called The Tao of Medicine. So think of something positive, something that's important to you that engages your heart, engages your soul. Um, so write, read, write. I mean, those are my go-tos always, reading and writing. I don't know. You have any other go-tos or any other things that people can do?
I go back to what we talked about with Alan Langer and this idea of just noticing. I've been practicing that. And so in noticing what are opportunities that I may have to bring kindness into the world. And so I have a number of ways. I mean, like you, I write, I read, um, I interact. We interact with the grandkids, listening. I remember when I was in undergraduate, one of my writing professors wrote this really great short story that happened for her during the Vietnam War when it was another time of challenge and difficulty. And the essay that she wrote was on canning tomatoes. That she was saying that in many ways she didn't know what she could do for what was happening in this larger political scene. But one of the things that she could do was that she could can tomatoes. And so she would can tomatoes and then she would offer these to neighbors and friends. And for her, that was just one small act of kindness that she was able to offer the world.
It's really funny, Chris. I was just going to read something out of Rebecca Solnit's book here, The Faraway Nearby, which is what I shared on Blue Sky, then a quote from here. And this book is about, amongst other things, it's about her relationship with her mother, who is developing Alzheimer's. But it starts off with her having this pile of apricots in her bedroom on the floor and her trying to figure out what to do with it and her canning these apricots. And then this whole thread of apricots that runs through the story. But Anyway, this is another book you should read. Like we were talking about Anatole Broyard earlier, and this book is really about stories. So here's how it starts. What's your story? It's all in the telling. Stories are our compasses and architecture. We navigate by them. We build our sanctuaries and our prisons out of them. And to be without a story is to be lost in the vastness of a world that spreads in all directions like Arctic tundra or sea ice. And that's where, this is a challenge of story right now, really. Are we in a story of caring or are we in a story of uncaring? Do we still have the power to determine our own stories, or are stories going to be determined by others for us, whether that's empire for St. Francis or people saying you can't do this type of work that's in your heart anymore, or people saying you can't say this or that or the other thing in your workplace. But here's the thing that I wanted to share and that I put out on a post. So here, Rebecca Solnit is writing about Virginia Woolf. She says, um, it's only by putting it into words that I make it whole, Virginia Woolf once wrote. She continued, Woolf did. This wholeness means that it has lost its power to hurt me. It gives me, perhaps because by doing so I take away the pain, a great delight to put the severed parts together. Perhaps this is the strongest pleasure known to me. It is the rapture I get when in writing I seem to be discovering what belongs to what. From this, I reach what might be called a philosophy. At any rate, it's a constant idea of mine that behind the cotton wool is hidden a pattern that we, I mean all human beings, connected with this, that the whole world is a work of art, that we are parts of the work of art.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I,
So
I have a story.
good, good. I was going to ask if you have a mindfulness. I'm starting to feel kind of lousy with this cold and everything, but what's your story?
I have a story that ends with a little bit of mindfulness.
It's the
And
best
it's
kind of story.
and I think it speaks to what we've been talking about the positive amidst kind of the challenges that maybe we all experience. When I was in college, I was just ready to graduate. Senior, completed all of my tests in the final semester. But I had an email. Well, I shouldn't say it was a mail. It wasn't an email back then. It was a letter in my mailbox. And it said from the bursar's office that you owe $600 and that if you can't pay this $600, you don't get a diploma and you don't graduate. And at that point, I did work washing dishes. That was my job. And I didn't have the $600. And so I happened to be talking to my grandmother. We usually talked about once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks. And we were talking, and she says, "How's it going?" I said, "Oh, I have this dilemma." So I shared with her kind of the dilemma. And then we just talked about it, moved on to, gossiping. And maybe 3 days later, 4 days later, I get an envelope in the mail, and it's a check for $600 from my grandparents. So I was able to graduate and go on to graduate school and all the other things I've been able to do. And this is actually in the book, Be a Good Story. Um, and so years later, we were caring for my grandmother who is dying of cancer. And she's laying on the couch. I'm sitting in the chair. We're talking. And I said, I've always wanted to ask you, where did you come up with the $600? I was very, very grateful. And she said, well, after we talked on the phone, I talked with your grandfather, and we decided that we would go to the jeweler, and we both gave him our wedding rings. And for the amount that our wedding rings were, we took that money and we sent it to you. And so that to me is a positive. It's like, how can we create positive? What are opportunities that we might have? So part of the practice that maybe I invite those who are listening or viewing, um, here's what I keep near my desk. And if you see that, that's a picture of my grandmother, my aunt, and she's holding my mother. And so part of this is I look at this every day. It's a way of remembering her, my mom, my grandfather, my aunt. That for me is a way that I attempt each day and the work that I do to always keep that in mind as a way of paying it forward of what are ways that um, I might bring more compassion, kindness to this world. And so that's what I would invite others to consider is what what might be one of the objects, as Mirabai talks about, that you have near you, or you would like to put close to you. I suspect you might have some of that on your end too, Dave, but that to me would be the practice, is just maybe finding one of those objects, or maybe it's already there, and just spending a little time with it.
Yeah, I like that. I'll just grab this painting off the wall. So this painting I keep on my wall here, and it's by my grandmother, Elizabeth or Elsie, as or Kopacz, 1967, which is the year I was born. He didn't paint this for me when I was born necessarily, but it's one of the things that I wound up with of hers. And, it has special meaning for me, the fact that she painted it the year I was born. So this is one of the many things. I've got a lot of things in my office. We could do a whole session sometime of just what do you have in your office? What are the 100 objects? Let's do that maybe next time or sometime. What are the 100 objects around you and what's the meaning of behind them? So um talking about the letter from school, I got a letter from the University of Illinois when I first started, and it was a different kind of letter than you got. It was a letter that said, "We have identified you as an underachiever. Your your test scores are much higher than your actual class grades. And so we have identified you as an underachiever." And that was the end of the letter. They didn't like set me up for like counseling or tutoring or mentoring or anything like that. I don't know what the point of it was, other than for them to maybe say, we think if we tell this guy that we don't think he can do it, maybe he'll do it. Maybe he'll rise to the occasion. It really irritated me. I was on academic probation the first semester too. So I really was kind of starting in a hole and trying to build my way out to be in straight A's by the time I left college. So, and Chris, I didn't tell you this. I'm sorry to ambush you, but I wanted to end today talking about noodling because I think there's some interesting metaphors there. So can you tell us what's noodling?
Noodling is something that happens in rivers where there's catfish. And it's really getting into the water. It's taking your hand and it's going into those places where the catfish are kind of hanging out and they kind of clamp onto you and you pull out the catfish and that's noodling.
Do you have to like wiggle your finger or something, or do you
You
just
can, yeah,
yeah?
yeah.
So so essentially, you're saying noodling is you stick your hand into some dark, cold place that you can't really see for some reason because you think something good is going to happen out of it. And you stick it in there and something on your hand and then you pull it out. And I started thinking about the metaphor of that of like, are we in this sort of dark place now where we're sticking our hand? What's it take? I started to think, I don't know if I'd want to stick my hand into like a hole in the log or something underwater. Um, but there's something good that comes out of it, if you're trying to sustain yourself or your family and you're trying to get some food. But then I started to think, how do we know in the story that we're the noodler and not the noodlee? Maybe we've clamped down on something that just poked into our world from somewhere outside of ourselves. It ruptured our little bubble and came in, and we've clamped down on it, and we're holding on for dear life, and we're getting pulled out of our environment. And so maybe there's there's times to hold on and there's times to let go. And so I suppose if we're the catfish in the story, maybe it's time to let go of whatever it is we're holding on to.
Sounds like a great place to end, Dave.
It does. It does. Thanks, Chris. Okay. And then I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.